What up? It's Mr. B History coming at you with World War II. They call it the Good War. That seems like an oxymoron. How can war be good? But that's what they call it. 1939 to 1945, the United States enters in 1941. These are Chapter 25 notes. We're cruising right along. Way to stay in there, guys. I believe in you guys. We're going to get through this. Remember, we seek peace, enduring peace. More than an end to war, we want an end to the beginning of all wars. Franklin D. Roosevelt really has a way with words. You gotta appreciate it. Let's get straight into the action. We're not going to start with Franklin D. Roosevelt. We're going to start with Herbert Hoover and his foreign policy. Sounds like a lot of stuff. So, worldwide, the Great Depression leads to the rise of dictators and totalitarian states. Totalitarian means a government that has total control over all its people. During times of war, they take away your freedom. And during times of Great Depression, they take away your freedom too, apparently. So people are willing to exchange their freedom for safety, like in the Soviet Union with Joseph Stalin, or in Italy with Benito Mussolini, or in Germany with Adolf Hitler, or in Japan with Hideki Tojo and Emperor Hirohito. Hoover's foreign policy is isolationism. We learned this last time when we heard about the Great Depression, and we learned that his domestic policy was laissez-faire, and his foreign policy was isolationism. So, when Hoover's president, Japanese aggression in Manchuria. Manchuria is a northeastern province of China, rich in natural resources. Japan invades Manchuria, a northern province of China, in violation of the Open Door policy and the League of Nations covenants. This happens in 1931. The League of Nations does nothing. Nobody cares about the League of Nations because the United States is not a part of the League of Nations. So the United States has its own response, which is the Stimson Doctrine, which is the United States will not recognize Manchukuo, which is the new name given by the Japanese to Manchuria, as a real country. This doctrine is not an effective deterrent. So this is not going to stop future aggression by other aggressive dictatorships. Herbert Hoover does have a positive, though. In Latin America, he has friendly relationships. He ended the interventionist policies of Taft and Wilson and went on a goodwill tour of the region. Way to go, Herbert Hoover. Let's get to the next slide. Franklin D. Roosevelt's policies. So the Great Depression basically everyone blames Herbert Hoover for the Great Depression. He has no chance of being elected. Franklin D. Roosevelt takes it, and his number one issue is getting the country out of the Great Depression. So he's focused on dealing with the Great Depression and did not spend much time on foreign affairs, except to continue to improve relations with Latin America. This becomes known as the Good Neighbor policy. Like a good neighbor, USA is there. This is a direct reversal of his grand uncle, Theodore Roosevelt's Roosevelt corollary that to the Monroe Doctrine, which said the United States would intervene in Latin American countries to prevent European nations from intervening in Latin American countries. In this case, the Good Neighbor policy is the U.S. pledged to never again intervene in the internal affairs of Latin American countries. You think that we kept that promise? Seriously, you think we kept that promise? Put it in the comments. If you can figure out, that's like super bonus Mr. B history bucks right there, because that's going to be stuff that we haven't even talked about yet. That's stuff for the future. Anyways, Cuba. In Cuba, they nullify the Plata Amendment, which means that we won't intervene in Cuban affairs, but we keep Guantanamo Bay. We still have Guantanamo Bay to this very day. In Mexico, Roosevelt does not intervene when the Mexican government seizes U.S.-owned oil properties. He negotiates a settlement to what a good neighbor. Franklin D. Roosevelt is there. Economic diplomacy. Focus was on using foreign policy to help end the Great Depression. He does this to recognize the Soviet Union, even though they're communists, in 1933, because we had never recognized them all the way from 1917 when they became communists. We refused to recognize them as a country. Yeah, USA. The Philippines, the Tiding-McDuffie Act of 1932 grants the Philippines independence by 1946. Fun fact, we grant their independence on July 4th, 1946, making their Independence Day our Independence Day. And removal of the U.S. military presence, that doesn't happen until after World War II. Reciprocal trade agreements, the president could lower tariffs by 50% for nations that also agreed to lower their tariffs. The goal was to increase trade. It worked with limited success. Events abroad, fascism and aggressive militarism, causes of World War II. So, causes of World War II. Why was there a World War II? World War I. No, just kidding. There was a Great Depression, a worldwide Great Depression, plus nationalistic. No, seriously, we were right about that, right? The cause of World War II is World War I, because there was nationalistic resentments after World War I. This leads to the rise of the dictators. Japan, Italy, and Germany sign a treaty of alliance. They become known as the Axis powers. In Italy, Mussolini's fascist party, they called him Il Duce, took power in 1922. Fascism is the belief that people should glorify their nations and race through an aggressive show of force. Germany, the Nazi party. They're anti-Semitic, which means they're against Jews. They're led by Adolf Hitler, the Führer, which just means leader in German, and his private army of brown shirts that take over the legislature in 1933. And then Japan, nationalists and militarists persuaded Emperor Hirohito to invade China and Southeast Asia for raw materials and created the, quote, Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which sounds wonderful but really is just a new Japanese empire. American isolationists. Lessons of World War I. Popular opinion was that World War I was a big mistake. Senator Nye committee report said that the main reason for U.S. participation was the greed of bankers and arms manufacturers. So one of the causes of World War I was trade with allied nations. And basically the committee report was, if we weren't so interested in making money off of selling weapons to England and France, we probably could have avoided going to war. So with that in mind, Congress passes a series of neutrality acts in 1935, 1936, and 1937. They're called the Neutrality Acts. So the 1935 one prohibits all arms shipments to countries that were at war and forbade U.S. citizens to travel on their ships. This was supposed to prevent a Lusitania-type accident that was one of the causes of World War I. In 1936, they forbore the extension of loans and credit to fighting countries. Belligerents, that's another word for fighting countries. So the extension of loans. One of the things that got us into World War I was that we loaned England and France billions of dollars, and then, when they looked like they were going to lose, we weren't going to get that money back. So there was a financial incentive to join on the side of the Allies. And then 1937, they forbade arms shipments to opposing sides of the Spanish Civil War. This is a further attempt, because I don't know if you guys know, but fun fact, Spanish people had a civil war. Oh, look, it's right there. The Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. General Franco's fascists versus Republican loyalists. The fascist wins with the help of Hitler, who sends him some tanks and modern artillery. The American First Committee, formed in 1940 to mobilize public opinion against joining the war. They hired famous people like the 1920s icon Charles Lindbergh, who flew across the Atlantic. Remember Lucky Lindy from the 1920s? Yeah. They hired him to speak out against the war. So we have a strong anti-war vibe going in the United States of America. So we have to go from being against the war to joining the war. Oh, prelude to war. Prelude just is like what comes before. So before we get into war, we got the policy of appeasement. Appeasement means allowing dictators to get away with relatively small acts of aggression and expansion, i.e. if you were at the grocery store, for example, and a small child was like, "Can I have a lollipop?" And if you give them the lollipop because they're crying like a little wham-wham baby, then next time you go to the grocery store, they're going to expect a lollipop again. In fact, they might be like, "I want 2 lollipops or I'm going to cry." So appeasement. All right, we gotta hurry. All right, so appeasement. Number 1, Ethiopia. In 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia. The U.S. and the League of Nations does nothing. That's called appeasement. You're letting Italy just stomp all over the Ethiopians. 2, the Rhineland, 1936. German troops march into the Rhineland, defying the Treaty of Versailles. Ooh, they don't even care. Number 3, China, 1937. Japan invades China. Just straight up invades the entire country. In the process, a U.S. boat gets blown up, and the United States accepts Japanese apology. Can you believe this? Someone blew up our boat. Usually that means war. Like, for example, when the USS Maine blew up in 1898, the yellow journalism blamed it on Spain, and we started the Spanish-American War. When the Germans kept sinking our boats in World War I, the United States declared war. And now Japan blows up one of our boats, and we're just like, "Oh, we accept your apologies." That's called appeasement. Is that going to stop them from blowing up our boats? No. The Sudetenland in 1938. Hitler takes over part of Czechoslovakia, and the British and the French meet with Germany at a city called Munich, and they sign the Munich Pact. And it's agreement that Hitler can have Sudetenland, but no more. You think that's going to work? That's a rhetorical question. The answer is no, that does not work. But they call Neville Chamberlain famously promises, "It's peace in our time." Boy, was that short-lived. All right, the quarantine speech. FDR tested public opinion by proposing to, quote, quarantine aggressor nations. He got a very negative response and dropped the idea. So people were still very, 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 very opposed to joining the war. So we're going from neutrality to war, 1939 to 1941. Preparedness. Roosevelt promises neutrality, but also starts an arms buildup, increases the Army and Navy budgets by 60%. So he's saying one thing to make the people happy, but secretly planning to join the war the whole time. In March 1939, Hitler invades all of Czechoslovakia, England, and France to prepare for war. In August of 1939, Hitler and Stalin, the Soviet Union, sign a non-aggression pact, which means they promise not to attack each other, and they divide Poland between the two of the countries. Evil dictators working together. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, and this, students, is the beginning, or A-pushers. A-pushers. We just got to go make this happen. Germany invades Poland using a new style of fighting called the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, which consists of an air assault bombers followed by fast-moving artillery tanks and then finally infantry. It is very, very successful and very effective and is able to destroy Poland in a matter of weeks. Britain and France, the Allies, declare war on Germany. Italy and Japan, the Axis. They declare war on Germany, Italy, and Japan. Those are the Axis powers. And now it is a world war. Let's go. Changing U.S. policy. So Roosevelt gradually begins helping the Allies, especially Great Britain. So very quickly, France falls to the Nazis' Blitzkrieg in 1940, and the United States starts doing a thing called cash and carry, which means warring countries could buy U.S. weapons if they used their own ships and paid cash. This is technically neutral, but favored the British, who controlled the Atlantic Ocean. The Selective Service Act of 1940 drafted 1.2 million men into the Army. It is the first peacetime draft. So more preparedness, even though we're not officially in the war, we're getting ready for. The Destroyers for Bases deal. The U.S. trade 50 U.S. destroyer boats for U.S. rights to naval bases in the Caribbean. They trade these to England. So England is in a little spot here since they're the only one of the Allies still around. And so the United States is really helping them out. We're not very neutral at this point, and everyone can kind of see that. So we're not really fooling that many people. The election of 1940, Roosevelt versus Wendell Willkie. Roosevelt breaks two-term tradition and wins. Economic recovery and fear of the war drives his victory. He's still very popular. He gives a speech where he says, "We need to be the arsenal of democracy." Roosevelt viewed Hitler as a threat to democracy. In a fireside chat, he told the country this: arsenal means a gun supplier, so we're going to have to, gun supply. He then gives a For Freedom speech, which justified lending money to Britain in order to defend freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. This guy is really pushing the idea that we need to help Great Britain. He follows this up with the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, where U.S. will let Britain borrow money and guns to fight this war. This is not neutral anymore. We're just saying, here, you can borrow this money to fight the Nazis, and these guns too. Just give them back when the war is over. Yeah, right. The Atlantic Charter. It's a secret agreement between Roosevelt and the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. They meet off the coast of Canada, and this is completely in secret. The U.S. public does not know this, and Britain agrees that if the United States helps them win the war, the peace treaty would include self-determination for all, no territory gained, and free trade for everyone. So this is actually very smart of Roosevelt. He does what Wilson should have done, which is bargain from a position of power where the British are in dire need of help, and so they'll give up anything to get that help, right? And so we basically are going to dominate the peace treaty, and we do this beforehand at the Atlantic Charter. Shoot on sight, 1941. The U.S. protects British ships from German submarine attacks and shoots any German submarine. This is an undeclared naval war. We're practically in this battle, you guys, and we're almost there. But we're not there yet. Disputes with Japan. So we're definitely not neutral, but we're not formally declaring wars yet. But then Japan further expands its empire, including the Dutch East Indies, British Burma, and French Indochina. The U.S. has an economic action. Roosevelt prohibits the export of steel and oil to Japan and also freezes Japan's assets in the United States. So when they continue to expand, the United States cuts off steel and oil. Oil is a strategic commodity that Japan cannot live with. At this point, the United States is an oil exporter, and so it's really exporting oil. And so without that, Japan needs oil to fuel its Navy and Air Force. They negotiate to avoid war. The United States wants to delay a fight to prepare, and Japan wants to fight while they still have oil. So the Japanese are kind of like pushed into this rash attack on Pearl Harbor. I guess it's not rash, it's a planned attack. So Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese surprise attack. Notice I put that in air quotes because there is evidence that the United States was aware that Japan was going to attack a Navy base, but they just didn't know exactly when. So Japan surprise attacks U.S. Navy base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, killing 2,400 Americans on a Sunday morning. How terrible. And promptly afterwards, there's a declaration of war. In a famous speech, FDR says, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. We were brutally and secretly attacked by the Japanese Empire. Congress declares war on Japan and its allies, Italy and Germany. And now the United States is in World War II, and it really truly is a world war. The Soviet Union is invaded, so Hitler turns on Joseph Stalin, and breaks the non-aggression pact, because apparently you can't trust evil dictators for nothing nowadays, and he invades the Soviet Union. Now Stalin is now teamed up with Great Britain and the United States against Germany, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And there we have it. That's the first half of chapter 25. It was quite a bit. We got over Hoover's policy and then Roosevelt's foreign policy, and then the events that led the United States into World War II. In the second half, we'll have fighting the war and the results of the war. So I hope you really appreciate all the hard work that went into this. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, ring that bell for notifications. Tell your friends and your friends' friends. And until next time, this is Mr. B History saying peace.